I've just finished watching Star Wars Andor Episode 5, and honestly, I am in love with this show. It's really up there for me alongside House of the Dragon right now, and unless something really bad happens to it midway through, I do believe we have the best Star Wars TV show ever made right here, and that's a huge surprise considering that I couldn't have cared less about it before it came out. And today's episode is no different in showcasing the strength of the story, the strength of the writing, the dialogue, the characters, the visuals, and for a show that is, right now, really limited on action, that's just a testament to how good it has been. As always, there are spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. So much like last week, this episode really was just a focus on character development more than anything else. All 45 minutes-ish of this episode really focused on Cassian and the crew of rebellious fighters that we met last episode, and to a lesser extent some of the antagonists that we've seen in previous episodes. So this week's episode starts out first and foremost with Cyril, the leader of the security forces from the first 3 episodes, and him dealing with his kind of despair in losing his role. Now, in the last episode, we didn't see anything of Cyril other than that he returned home to his mother, and we're finally getting to see the dynamic and the relationship between the two, and it's clearly not a good one. There is obviously some resent between the two, with his mother expecting a ridiculous amount of him even after his failure, instead of giving him the necessary support and comfort that he needs to deal with his grief. And so he's dealing with this grief alone, and we can tell that this is going to build up into some kind of perhaps desperation or maybe depravity over time. Now, the dialogue is good here, and so is the acting. The performance of the dude who plays Cyril is spot on. But he doesn't have too much to do, but I did enjoy the scenes with him in. After the introduction, this is where we really get into what is the meat and veg of the episode, and that is the dynamic and the development of all of the individual members of this heist crew, I guess, where we learn why they're fighting for the rebellion. We delve a little bit more into their personalities and individuality, and how they all perceive Cassian on a different level. And all of this is done through expertly written dialogue, and it's such a nice, a fresh breath of air to have really good writing in a Star Wars story. The writing's not cheesy, it's not forced, it feels like general conversation between people who are perhaps a little bit on edge and afraid of what comes next. And a big credit goes to all of the actors because they make it feel natural. They have some great performances and they bring those individual personalities to their characters in a very natural way. For example, we have Skeen, who is extremely cautious of Cassian, but he puts on this facade of a person Cassian can talk to, but we know what he's trying to do. He's really trying to get into the mindset of Cassian and try and figure out what he's actually doing there in the first place. He's quite gruff, he's quite monotone, but you can see underneath that there is a man that has been through some stuff. And this is in stark contrast to the younger member of the team, Nemik, who is, despite hating the Empire, is a lot more trusting of Cassian and has a lot more of a youthful, although slightly wise, more philosophical view on everything. And each individual character that they focus on in this episode is well written enough. And in fact, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the book Inferno Squad, where a member of the Empire, Iden Versio, is made to infiltrate a rebellion group. And I thought that book was really, really well written in making all of these individuals feel interesting enough to carry the story. And I don't know whether they've taken a lot of inspiration from that, but it feels very similar, just, without the Imperial infiltrator spin. However, I definitely do believe that we shouldn't be getting attached to any of these characters because I have no doubt that they aren't going to survive too much of the story. But I think that that will be a good thing because they're writing them in a way and giving us enough time with them in a way that's going to, I think, allow us to actually appreciate their sacrifices or their deaths in whatever way comes. And if I was to look at any other Star Wars show and look at all of the side characters that died, I just felt nothing because those shows didn't really give us any time with them. The writing was too weak in those shows, especially stuff like Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett, to really make me care about any of them, even though they had good potential. And it's just nice to see a show that's giving us time and it's giving us space to connect with these characters, to feel for these characters' plights and then potentially mourn for them in the future. Who knows? Next, we flip back to Coruscant with Mon Mothma, and there's not too much for her to do this week. A little bit more dialogue again, allowing Genevieve O'Reilly to showcase her acting chops as the character, but nothing too groundbreaking in terms of moving her plot forward. Instead, what we see is maybe she's not quite supported by her family on the things that she finds important herself, and you can see that this affects her. We also have a small scene with Deidre, the Imperial woman from last week, and we didn't learn too much about her either this week, other than that she's trying to figure out what's going on because she can sense some kind of rebellious activities occurring. And we can see in this episode that people do look down on her, apart from this one dude who's a bit creepy. And she's really trying to see through the randomness of the rebellion's actions, and seeing through that randomness she believes is a pattern. And while she is a clever character, and we can tell that, she isn't given too much to do. In fact, none of the antagonists really are. There's only a few scenes with all of them, but their stories aren't really moved forward, or their motivations or intentions or whatnot. And I don't think that's actually going to change until after the big Heist episode, because that's where I think all of these villainous characters that the show's established so far are going to click. I think that's where Cyril is going to end up getting involved with Deidre, who wants to use Cyril's knowledge of Cassian to understand what happened in the heist. And I think the story is just waiting for this big moment, this big stake moment we're building up to before the villains really have something to bite on. And then we get to the closing stages of the episode, and Skeen rips off the crystal off of Cassian's neck, the Riccarton crystal that we saw last week, and essentially points out that he's not part of the team because he believes in it, and what Cassian's been saying isn't quite true, and that all of his interactions with Cassian up to this point have been really evasive, and so he's very cautious, and he's telling the team that he doesn't trust him. And this is where Cassian then basically admits to the whole team, yeah, I've been paid to do this, I'm not doing it because I necessarily want to. And it's interesting to see how that information is going to impact their relationships moving forward. I don't know, honestly, maybe it will bring them closer together, we just have to wait and see. However, there is like a resolution between Cassian and Skeen towards the end of the episode where Skeen reveals why he joined, and it was his brother that has essentially killed himself because the Empire took everything from him, his home, etc. And that he wants revenge on the Empire, and that's why he believes in this cause. And this openness from Skeen allows Cassian to, well, it allows the two to come together a little bit more, and I'm interested in seeing how these two specific characters, how their relationship develops moving forward, assuming that Skeen doesn't die. And then we have the sort of final scene with Luthen, who wasn't in this episode much at all. We can see that this big heist means a lot to him. We don't necessarily know why, and he's worried that it might not work out. And that was the episode. Now, one thing that has stood out for me over these past 5 episodes is the pacing. I have been so critical of Star Wars shows for years because of the absurdly poor pacing, but this show is just doing a fantastic job of not allowing things to feel rushed, but also finding space to tell a number of different stories within the same kind of bubble. The story is really taking its time to build up these characters and build up these stakes that is allowing us to connect on just a further level with these characters that we haven't really done with other Star Wars shows. And another quick note that I want to mention here is the sound of TIE fighters in this episode. I don't know what it is or if it's just me. I've seen TIE fighters a million times, but the way TIE fighters are presented in this episode are really kind of ominous and threatening. And that screeching sound of the engines is something I have heard too many times to count, but for the first time, hearing it actually made me feel a little bit kind of tense. So kudos to the sound team because it was great. Either way, this was the middle episode of what I think is going to be a 3-episode story arc that's going to conclude next week. And this is where we're going to get the heist or the raid or whatever they're going to call it. And all of this slower paced storytelling we've had for the past 2 episodes is going to culminate and pay off. And I'm really excited to see what they do. As always, if you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal. And if you want to stay up to date with my reviews of Andor, perhaps consider subscribing so you're notified for next week's review. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.